Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. This is an episode of Culturally Determined, and I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade. And my guest today is someone probably most Blogging Heads viewers recognize, Dan Kaufman. Dan, could you introduce yourself?
So I'm Daniel Kaufman. I'm a professor of philosophy at Missouri State University. I co-host the Sophia program on Meaning of Life TV with Massimo Pigliucci. And I sometimes also put on a pop cultural hat when I talk with my good friend Aryeh about comics and movies and other sorts of things like that.
Right, so today we're going to be talking about Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and Star Wars more generally. We are going to be including spoilers for the new movie in this conversation, so if you haven't seen the movie and want to remain unspoiled, you should probably stop listening now, and if you haven't seen the movie, at least I would recommend you go see it because I enjoyed it a lot. Okay, so all viewers have been duly warned, so let's launch in. So what did you think of Star Wars The Force Awakens?
You know, it's actually a little bit of a complicated question. Overall, thought it was great.
Mm-hmm.
That said, whether I think it is ultimately successful, and I don't mean that financially, but successful as an artwork, I'm not sure we're going to be able to tell yet, partly because of what I think it needs to do to be successful as an artwork. It needs to, in a sense, represent the beginning of a new trilogy for a new generation of kids, and to play the kind of role that the first trilogy did, and which the second trilogy did not.
Right.
And if it doesn't do that, if it's just a one-off, then my hindsight review of it would go down significantly.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would look at it. But as a film by itself, as if nothing else existed, it's great.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I think so I liked it a lot. Also, it was just, as a pure movie, it was a lot of fun. Star Wars or not, certainly much better than the prequels. I think pretty much everyone could agree on that. And I think the main criticism that people have had of it is that it's so derivative, so much of either a pastiche, an homage, a remake, even some people are saying, of the original Star Wars, which became known as Episode 4, A New Hope. So what did you think about that?
Yeah,
that critique?
And that's sort of that is what feeds into the complicatedness of the review, right? So it is indeed almost exactly the same movie as the first Star Wars movie. I mean, literally,
right.
In terms of the order of plot elements and what they are.
We'll link to Roth Douthat's review. I don't know if you saw that. He laid out just in a paragraph the exact sequence of plot events, and it lines up almost perfectly with the original movie.
Yeah, I mean, even to the point of the girl getting kidnapped, and then Han Solo having to break into the Death Star Part 2 to capture her, and all. I mean, to get her back, and I mean, and the droid hiding the information that's crucial to the rebellion. I mean, it's just now. Normally, you'd say, well, this is a disaster. I mean, this is just a remake that refuses to call itself a remake. But I think actually that this was clearly, obviously this was done on purpose. J.J. Abrams, whatever you may think of him, does not do things by accident, right? It was done on purpose, and I think it was done largely because in order to clear away any memory of the prequels and to, in a sense, reset everything. So it's like we're starting this all over again, right? And what's the best way to do that is to reconnect with the original characters who had such a huge cultural impact on a whole generation of kids, and also to go back to the basic plot elements, the adventure plot elements that so substantially sort of burned this into the psyche of generations of American kids. And so I think he had to do something like this because of the prequels. If that's why I said, if indeed this becomes now the next, Generation Z's Star Wars, it will have been a success, a huge success. If it fails to do that, then this move will not have worked, and then I think then it's going to shrink in our estimation.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot rides on what's coming after, and also they're not just continuing the trilogy. They're going to have all these extra films. Like there's going to be like a Rogue One film about
Yeah.
X-wing pilots, and I think like a young Han Solo
Yeah,
film. So
that
they're going to try
worries
to
me.
do. They're going to do what like Marvel is trying to do with expanding it out so every possible character gets a movie and makes a lot of money.
I think that's a mistake. I have to tell you, that actually, to me, and I don't know enough about the back behind the scenes stuff, where how much control Abrams has. I don't know if Abrams is controlling the whole franchise or whether this is Disney in a sense.
I think it's probably the latter, because I know
Yeah.
Abrams is not directing the next movie, which is
Yeah.
actually Lucas did not direct Empire. Is that right? I'm almost positive that Lucas directed
That's correct.
Star Wars, but did not direct Empire and Jedi.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
So we have another echo of the past there.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about Force Awakens and kind of this critique of it. I think actually I taped a dialogue that will probably air after this one with a philosophy professor who's written one of these pop culture Star Wars and philosophy books. And, it's a famous fact that Lucas looked at Joseph Campbell and The Hero with a Thousand Faces, I think is the name of that book, and used this kind of basic mythos to construct the plot of the first movie, and borrowed from a lot of other sources, movies and other myths. And I think if you look at it that way, then kind of the borrowing and recreating the story, if it's this basic myth of, the orphan child, discovers they have a special destiny and they go off and, have adventures, and they have a wise older mentor figure who gets killed, and, their unique abilities able to defeat evil. I think that makes a little more sense for if they're continuing this idea of the making a modern myth, which I think is what Lucas has said he wanted to do with the first movie. The rehashing makes more sense.
Yeah, no, I generally agree with that. The extent to which one would want to say its myth-making qualities are what caused it to connect and resonate so profoundly with generations of American kids. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's necessarily what I would credit as the reason for the way it sort of has buried itself into the consciousness of Americans. But I agree that it certainly is not science fiction in any meaningful sense. And in that sense, it's a completely different animal from Star Trek, which is the thing it's always compared to, because that's the only other franchise that has the kind of resonance with Americans that Star Wars does at that scale. I agree that it has it's a mythic tale, and in that sense, the rehash is less of a rehash. It's not simply a raiding the closet of what we already wore, or well, clothes we already wore, but is in a sense a reinterpretation of what's a sort of a set of core ideas and core relationships and core tropes and stuff that make up mythology. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and as I mentioned this other dialogue, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I heard a commenter on NPR remarking that the other kind of pop culture phenomenon of the past 20 years that has taken the world by storm is Harry Potter.
Yes.
And the basic beats of the Harry Potter story, the basic beats of Luke's story are very similar.
Yep.
Orphan, special powers, a male friend and a female friend, an older mentor figure who gets killed, father.
A villain with whom there is an interesting connection in the backstory.
Who's kills the father in some ways in Star Wars, explicitly in Harry Potter, so on and so forth. So it does seem like that, that Lucas and J.K. Rowling successfully tapped into some kind of core story that we want to hear.
Agreed.
So one of the other interesting critiques that I've read, and I think Darth mentioned this, and then actually I think the political writer Ben Dominic mentioned this also, is it seemed like towards the end of the movie, there's this. The thing that I think is maybe what's silliest about the movie is like they built another Death Star. Like the first two, okay, one Death Star, shockingly, Luke was able to blow it up. The secret plans, the exhaust port. Okay, then the second Death Star. Okay, we'll try it one more time, and actually, it's a trap. It's a fully armed and operational battle station. Oh, I have to show you that I'm wearing my Emperor Penguin.
Oh, nice
T-shirt right
That's
now for this
freaking awesome.
special episode. Okay, so they built the second Death Star. It was blown up yet again. And then somehow, 30 years later, it's like, let's just do another Death Star. It'll be bigger. It'll be an entire planet. but somehow it still has this it still has this
exactly
weakness.
the same weekness, right?
So the critique was, would it have been a better movie if the rebel or resistance attack on the new Death Star, which I think was called Star Killer, if that failed, and then so it had the dark ending that Empire had instead of the happy ending that Episode 4 had. What do you think about that?
Look, that's impossible to say without knowing what the plans for the second movie is, right? So I mean, without knowing what the second movie is going to be about, it's impossible to say whether a negative ending, as a freestanding movie, if there was nothing else, of course. But then again, as a freestanding movie, it shouldn't have been as derivative it was to begin with. I mean, this is part of trying to recreate. What I'm really praying is not the case, is that we see this kind of cloning throughout this trilogy. In other words, that, that the whole trilogy has a similar kind of arc. Mm-hmm. Would, I think, be a bit too much. I mean, it's all very well to sort of talk about tapping into universal archetypes of myth, but there is a point at which you are simply self-plagiarizing in a way that looks lazy. Now, I don't even know whether this is. I don't. I need to see it a few more times, but I don't. Maybe you remember better than I do. I thought I remembered that when they unveiled this thing, when they were talking about it in the war room, that it was almost like a joke in the movie. It's that it's just a bigger Death Star, right? I mean,
they show a
like a little picture of it right next to the screen.
Yeah. So they're acknowledging that
there's a bit of self-parody, right? I mean,
So it is, but so I think so there was a big twist in the movie, which spoiler alert. Of Han Solo getting killed, so that was a pretty big twist, and you can kind of see it coming. But also, I think one of the interesting reviews that I read, I can't remember which one, said that what they really liked about it was in that moment, it would have made sense for Kylo Ren either to kill his father Han Solo or not kill him. Like it seemed like the character was deep enough that there was free choice there, so you weren't really sure what was going to happen. So that was a big twist. But then if there was another big twist of the Resistance getting destroyed, and then like Princess Leia would get blown up as well, and then everything is scattered, I think that maybe would have been a better ending. It was certainly darker, and then that would have made like the quest to go find Luke even more imperative, because like we really need him now, and need the Jedi to come back and fight the powerful First Order or whatever it's called.
It's funny, the killing of Han Solo enraged my wife. So she and I went to see the film together, and both of us, alas, are old enough to have seen the original movies when they actually ran in the theaters. Mm-hmm. My wife was a teenager when the first one came out, and I was a kid. She's 7 years older than I am, and she Harrison Ford was one of her teen crushes, and so she had an even more sort of intense sort of like set of feelings for this character, and she was furious. I mean, she was. I think she like yelled "fuck" in the middle of it or something like that. I mean, she was really upset. I actually was not. I going into it felt like one of the two of them was going to die, and I didn't know whether it would be Carrie Fisher or Harrison Ford's characters. In terms of the ending, I question a little bit the wisdom of having as much Luke in the ending as they did. I almost wondered whether it would have been better ending with her heading off with Rey heading off in the Millennium Falcon on the quest that then would set up the next movie. I understand why they did it, and it's not something that I would make a major criticism out of. But I thought it went on a little, or maybe they should have done it as an after the credits, or I don't know. I just felt a little bit like it felt a little bit stretched out. But of course, it also then more strongly raised the questions of whether she's his daughter, which I thought was which I think is a strong thing to sort of think about and to anticipate in the future. I do hope we're also going to talk about the Kylo Ren character.
I definitely want to talk about him. But with the ending, it's interesting. I didn't think there was too much Luke. I mean, I thought there was not enough Luke, but I don't think actually.
So how would you have wanted more Luke? How could you have seen that?
Well, I don't think he speaks a line in the movie.
No,
Maybe
he does not.
Possibly in that flashback they used some audio, or the Vision quest kind of scene. They used an audio of him, but So he doesn't say anything at the end. And I actually kind of liked it because it was an echo of the scene where Kylo Ren kills Han Solo, because she's holding out the lightsaber, and you have someone who might be her father, it's less mysterious, and strongly implied that this is Luke's daughter. And I just thought it was an interesting echo from the most dramatic earlier scene, and links the Ren character with the Rey character.
Right.
But I know I kind of wanted Luke to say something in that last part.
Yeah.
It certainly left. I mean, it was a good ending. But I think so. Let's talk a little bit about Kylo Ren. And so I think people are split about him. Actually, my wife liked him a lot, and I don't know if you watch Girls.
No, I have not.
Okay, so he's the love interest for the main character of Girls, and has a very kind of distinctive character because he's unusual looking and he has a very distinctive way of speaking. And every time I've seen him in something that's not Girls, I can't help but thinking, hey, it's Adam from Girls in this movie. So he actually has a small cameo in the movie Lincoln, which was a total miscasting because he does not speak like someone from 1865. He's just like, oh, it's Adam from Girls talking to Abraham Lincoln. So I kind of had somewhat of a similar thought with this, although my wife had a contrasting perspective. She hates Adam from Girls on the show Girls because he's kind of a crazy character and annoying, but she found him to be very compelling as a villain, and pretty much liked everything about him. So what did you think of him?
Okay, so I would say that his was the most sort of troubled in terms of my estimation of the film. His character was the most troubled for me in the sense of I intensely disliked him. Mm-hmm. Not in a good way, not in the sense of, oh, he's a villain, I hate him, but more in the sense of, God, he sucks. But I also feel that is somewhat generational, and that I understand why he is the way he is given the audience to whom this is pitched. Basically, to me, he's like hipster Darth Vader. He has every worst sort of navel-gazing, psychologically overwrought millennialist qualities that I just cannot stand. And being an Xer, of course, I would hate all those qualities because we're a bunch of cynics and jerks. But they're not making these movies for me. These movies are for 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds, and this is the sort of villain that resonates with them. And so I really don't want, in that sense, want to be too critical. He did what he was asked to do very well. He did play a tormented, racked, in many ways quite weak villain. That's what he was supposed to be. Because that's the kind of villain that I think, the younger generation is going to identify with much more so than the kind of villain that the original Darth Vader was. My only concern is, I don't know if this is something you can climb up from. In other words, if the aim is to have his arc, have him become as scary a villain as Darth Vader, I'm not sure that's ever going to happen because he is such a wuss in this movie. That I don't know that they could do anything to him to make him frightening. Like, he's not scary. That's the problem.
Right. I think my wife was joking. She said it, or one of her friends said it. The feeling they had towards him was, I feel like I could fix him. Like it's a bad boy who you want to take care of and lead him back to the light side of the Force.
Which is part of the reason why the scene with Han Solo works, because you actually do believe that maybe, he really is conflicted enough that, as much as that was telegraphed when it was played out, the acting was so well done in that sequence that I actually wondered whether, is he going to actually turn around? Is this whole thing going to go in a totally different direction?
Right.
Now, of course it didn't, but I actually was for a moment caught up in it. So I think what I want to say is that the young man's performance is very good. He did exactly what they asked him to do. It is exactly what it's supposed to be. I do think that it's for generational reasons that he's the kind of villain that he is, though. And from what I've been watching, I watch a lot of YouTube critics. And from what I've seen, the opinion on him splits a lot along age lines. The older the critics, the more they dislike him. And the younger the critics, the more they tend to like him. I haven't taken a scientific sample, but that's and that's Abrams did the right thing then. This should be forward-looking. This should not be nostalgia bait, right? I understand that, yes, a lot of the money is going to come in from people my age who are one last gasp at our youth, right? But that's not anything that has future potential. This has to be for the next generation of kids.
Right.
And so I think that the choice was a good choice, although personally I couldn't stomach the guy.
Right. So have you heard the fan theory of Kylo Ren being a deep undercover Jedi agent?
Yeah, I never, those theories never turn out to be true, right? I mean, they just, I remember.
Well, if you think, so here's, someone like, a random person on the internet wrote this, and then the more I think about it, the more it kind of makes sense to me. So the idea would be that, there's this mysterious figure, Supreme Leader Snoke, I think it is.
Yeah.
And so there's like, they need to find some way to get to him. And so Kylo Ren goes undercover as, embracing the dark side of the Force, and he fakes killing the young Jedi Academy that Luke is running, and all the young Jedi apprentices are like scattered around the galaxy, and so that's how Rey gets sent away to a desert planet without her parents, and we can't know where she comes from exactly because she was in the Jedi Academy, and that's also how she kind of knows how to use Jedi mind tricks and wield a lightsaber so effectively because she had some training, but her mind has been wiped or something like that. And then he's deep undercover, and if you think about it that way, then the scene with Han is like even more emotionally affecting because he has to kill his father in order to stay undercover. It's not that he's pure evil, and there's a line about he's saying something like, I'm being pulled both ways or something like that. So that makes a little bit more sense if you think he is undercover. And then if we're thinking that they are kind of, so the big thing about Empire is the twist of finding out that Vader is Luke's father. And so if there's an equivalent twist in episode 8 of the new trilogy, it could be Kylo Ren is actually good and he's gonna, join up with Rey and fight for the good sides of the dark side. So what do you think?
Is this theory supposed to be that the rebellion knows this or not?
I think that he's so deep, probably Luke would know it, or he's so deep undercover, maybe everyone else's minds have been wiped.
No, what I'm saying is that this undercover is taken to the point to which he kills one of the most important figures of the rebellion in order to keep his cover.
Right. So
that's just rubbish, right? I mean,
I mentioned this in my other Star Wars dialogue, and my conversational partner mentioned that this would be actually pretty similar to what happens in the Harry Potter story, where Snape is undercover as being evil, and he kills Dumbledore in order to ultimately get at Voldemort. So it would be kind of a possible borrowing from this idea. Anyway, I think this is an interesting thing to consider, but maybe there's still 4 years or 3 years.
I think it's actually interesting though that these kinds of look. I think that the intricate putting together of these kinds of theories is what's so interesting. I don't know how much of a gamer you are, but the last installment of the Mass Effect trilogy. And Mass Effect is one of the largest, most successful franchises in PC and console gaming. The last episode, the ending of it was so disappointing to the fans that one unprecedented thing that happened was that the company, BioWare, actually made a new ending in response to fan outrage and released it as free stuff. But another thing that happened is that the fan community created these elaborate theories to explain why the disappointing ending really wasn't the ending. And I actually think it's a testament to how culturally powerful these things are. That with every single one of these things, whether it be a film or a game or something like this that has this sort of impact, the fans are led to create these elaborate theories. And I almost want to say that these fan theories are almost a form of fan fiction. I mean, they really are a way of the fans to use the franchise and the universe to make their own art in. And I actually think that that's one of the things that's so powerful about these types of franchises is that they get into the consciousness of people so deeply that it leads them to want to make their own art, to create within the universe themselves.
Yeah, and certainly fan fiction and is like as the internet has come along is a growing thing, and even the best-selling book series of the past 5 years which is unfortunately 50 Shades of Grey, started off as Twilight fan fiction.
Right.
It's growing more and more powerful. And that what you just said reminded me, this has been going on for a long time, because it reminds me a little bit of the old Marvel No Prize. Do you remember those?
Yeah, sure.
So it was if a fan reading a Marvel comic discovers a discrepancy in what happened, like they said that Spider-Man was at this place at this time, but really this other comic showed him over here, you would write in and you would point this out, but you had to give an explanation for what happened that would make sense.
That's right.
And then they called it a no prize because the original joke was that there was no prize, but then eventually they started sending out an empty envelope that said Marvel no prize, and this was in the 60s, the Stan Lee era of Marvel Comics. So the fans have always kind of been in this genre, have always kind of been picking up the slack and apologizing for the stuff that
but
they
it's
love.
not. I don't think it's just slack picking up. I mean, I think it's actually, this is something I was thinking about doing some work in my professional writing, in my academic writing. I actually think that there's something really interesting about this idea of art as a collaborative exercise, right, between audience and artist. And both Star Wars and Star Trek, there's an enormous number of fiction that's been published within the universes that they create. And that fiction, in order to be published, has to be submitted to a kind of a canon committee, right? That makes sure that all the lore and the canon remains consistent over time. And what that shows is how much these worlds matter to the people, right?
Right.
Who buy them, right? Who buy the books and the movies and the TV and the DVDs and stuff. To a certain extent, you can almost say that people like Lucas create almost sandboxes for us to play in, right? And it's a testament to how compelling the initial world building is, that you just get these sprawling, decades long. I mean, you go into a bookstore, go look how many Star Wars novels there are. Go look at how many Star Trek novels or Doctor Who novels. It's astonishing. And really, I can't think of. It's a kind of greatness that's maybe different from what we typically call great literature or great art, that I think deserves more attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And one of the things that was controversial about this new trilogy is that there was this thing called the Expanded Universe, which was all the novels and comic books and everything that came after the original movies, and they kind of had their own continuity and canon. And some of these were very popular. I read a couple when I was a teenager. And they basically said, these no longer count as canon.
Yeah, they cut it off at the knees.
Real in the fictional universe. And so, I think some of the fans felt like they had invested years of their lives, in this universe, and suddenly everything is different. But I think some of the plot points in the new movie echo things that happen in the Expanded Universe novels about one of Han and Leia's kids becoming evil, or Luke's kid becoming evil, something like that.
Yes, and actually this. A lot of people wonder whether, in actuality, this movie was to some extent homage to some of the fiction, because this almost exact plot line does play out in one of the novels, where they have a kid who goes over to the dark side of the Force and becomes a Darth. I forget the name of the Darth. It's been a while since I read it, but it's very, very possible that Abrams, in looking around for sort of plot material and characters and stuff, either this was pointed to him or he was already familiar with it. But in terms of breaking lore and breaking canon and maybe undermining some of this sort of fan universe, Abrams unfortunately has a bit of a reputation for doing this, because this is one of the things that people hate about what he did to Star Trek. Now, at least in Star Trek, he kind of rebooted it in a way that he created an alternative history so that he could justify doing all these things, and then also at the same time say, well, I didn't really destroy the lore of the canon because it's over in the other universe over there. It's a very, in many ways, a Marvel-y sort of way of doing it,
Right.
although not, he didn't do it as well as Marvel does it, of course. But he does have a bit of a reputation for being a lore and a canon breaker. I think much less so in this case, though, than in Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to go on? Do you want to talk about the prequels next and why this movie was better than the prequels, or do you want to talk a little bit about Star Trek?
I'm happy to talk about the prequels. I mean, I don't know that we need to talk about them that much. I mean, I don't know how you look. They're universally disliked.
Right.
And here's the first thing I would ask you, your opinion, and then that would lead to the second thing. Are they universally disliked because they're bad movies? Or are they universally disliked because they fundamentally do something? They fundamentally don't do what the first three movies do. What's your feeling about that?
I think it's both. Some anonymous internet genius re-edited the prequels into a single movie. Have you heard about this?
I've heard about it, but I've not actually watched it, but I know about it. Yes.
Right. So you can if you use torrent, you can find it online and watch it on torrent. So it's about 2 hours 45 minutes. So they took 2.5 hour movies and cut them down, and so they cut out the entirety of the Phantom Menace except for the final lightsaber duel. So that's the beginning. There's no Jar Jar. There's no little kid Anakin. There's no pod racing. So they cut all that out, and then they cut a lot of stuff from the second and third movies to make it kind of more coherent. So my wife and I watched that as kind of our preparation before we rewatched the original trilogy, and it's still not super great, but it is better than what was there. There's a lot less stuff about, there's nothing about the Trade Federation or all that weird stuff. But what really struck me with the new movie versus the prequels is that, like, George Lucas just cannot direct human beings. He lost that ability. Maybe he never really had it to begin with, but the dialogue is so stilted and the acting is so poor. And I don't think Hayden Christensen is a great actor, but Natalie Portman is a good actress, and she just seems so wooden. And the characters are not acting like human beings, and that's something I really liked about The Force Awakens. The characters seem like they're human beings. They're reacting. I mean, they're in fantastical situations, but they're reacting more or less as humans would, and the acting is very good, and there's no bizarre dialogue that no human would ever actually say.
Well, that speaks to them being bad movies. But
right.
In what sense would you say that they were bad because they didn't do what people had come to think of Star Wars movies as doing? Because I actually think that's the bigger problem. Because look, in a lot of ways, New Hope is a terrible movie also. With terrible acting and cliche lines and stuff that's just sort of, it's a better universe than it is a movie, and it's a better adventure than it is a movie in a way. Mark Hamill's not a great actor.
Right.
Even Carrie Fisher's. The lines are not. So I actually think that the second thing is the worst problem with those prequels. It's not just that they're bad movies, but that they're bad Star Wars movies. In what sense did you think they were bad Star Wars movies?
Well, it seemed like they were more concerned with this, the political aspect, which wasn't super interesting, and just they lost the sense of fun. I think was really part of it. Especially like I have a heterodox opinion that I for some reason like Return of the Jedi the best, but there kind of is like just a sense of fun, excitement, adventure that's in them, and that really wasn't there in the originals. I think it's something else that's the originals the originals had, and this is kind of a technological issue as well, is that the originals, it seemed like a real universe. It seemed like everything was real because it had to be real. It was either a miniature model that they were using, or they actually built the set. And Lucas decided that he wanted to test the limits of computer-generated imagery, and so I think a lot of the scenes were just filmed on green screen. They had Jar Jar Binks, a character who wasn't really there, and it just seems like it's fake. Like what was good about Star Wars, it seems like the Millennium Falcon wasn't this like gleaming perfect ship like in Star Trek, and it was like always breaking down and it looked real, and it was like scorch marks and stuff on the sides. And then in the prequels, they made it this like digital universe, and I think the technology wasn't really there yet to make it look seamless. So it just seemed, and the wooden acting, green screen. Uh, Lucas is like obsessed with this idea of like something skittering around the edge of the frame all the time when he did the remake, when the remastered editions that were re-released in the late '90s. He added in all these little CGI critters like
makes them very busy,
moving around all the time.
Yeah.
So it was all these. I think that sense of this is really, even though it's fantastical, this is a real world. That was totally lost as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I almost entirely agree with you. I would add just a few maybe layers. The prequels. One major mistake they made was they went into too much detail. It was almost like he wanted to turn it into Star Trek or something by giving you all the intricate politics and the details of all of this, which, look, never made any sense. The original one is very archetypal. It's not supposed to be this thing where you get all of these details about the background politics and everything that goes into it. You can explore that stuff in the fiction, which they did, but it just doesn't work in film. It's not. Look, Star Trek is a very talky, in terms of a lot of talking, TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the films before Abrams did the reboot, they're very talky. Star Wars is action with very sort of, I want to say, simple but powerful emotions tied to the action and tied to what's going on. And so one mistake they made was trying to get all detailed and to fill in all of the background universe, which was simply never well enough realized to begin with to do it. And B, that's not what anybody watches it for, right?
Right.
If they want that, they watch Star Trek. And the second thing I agree with you is that the CGI was a disaster. And all you need to do to see how wrong it went is just to watch movies where it's done right. Watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where you don't have that problem, right? Where the CGI doesn't undermine from the locations and from all the sort of where there's the right balance. And I don't know why Lucas did that, whether it was out of laziness. But look, the man was never a great director or a great writer. The only really great movie the guy ever made was American Graffiti. Right? I'm in terms of a really great movie where you might actually consider, like, say, okay, this is a great director. This is a great American Graffiti is a fantastic movie. What he was good at was at creating a universe that was simple and compelling and creating stories within it that would capture the imaginations of kids. The last thing I'll say about the prequels that I thought was a mistake was part of why they went too far in the direction of child service. In other words, unlike you, I thought Return of the Jedi was the worst of the three of the original, because it leaned too far. It went too far down the road of little kids. The Ewoks made me I wanted to go on a chainsaw rampage after I saw the Ewoks. But it wasn't enough to spoil it, right? But by the time you get to the prequels, it really clear. Okay, this is for 8-year-olds. And that's a bit much. I mean, I do think that Star Wars has always been primarily targeted towards kids, but it was the kind of targeting towards kids that also could allow adults to revel in being kids. Maybe in the way that G.K. Chesterton talks about it in The Ethics of Elfland, about the way fairy tales allow adults to recapture. That fairy tales are really most important for adults because they allow adults to recapture their childhood sensibility. I thought that was the magic of Star Wars, that it was for kids, but it also was for adults, and that it allowed adults to sort of recapture the mindset of their youth. I thought that the prequels went way too far and turned it into a kiddie show with this weird, detailed, complex politics dumped on top of it, and the whole thing didn't work as a result.
Yeah. So we can agree that the new movie strikes a lot better.
It goes right back to that original formula. I think it hits it right in every way. I actually think the performances are, for the most part, much better than A New Hope. The timing of the lines, the acting is better. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go back and watch A New Hope, and count how many lines seem rushed, how many seem awkward, how many are poorly delivered, and you'll be actually shocked at how bad it is in a lot of ways. I say that absolutely adoring it. But in terms of acting and all that, this is far superior. I think in that sense, Abrams really has a great cast, and they really delivered. And it's very It's emotionally powerful. It has the same impact that original movie did, and maybe even a little bit more, just in terms of its delivery. Right.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about Star Trek?
Sure. I mean, look. I mean, we talked about it a little bit already. I mean, I think that at some point somebody's going to need to write about this unusual and incredible sort of situation where you have these two massive science fiction popular culture franchises, one primarily associated with the small screen, the other with the big screen, that together are such a juggernaut. I can't think of anything else that has even a close pop cultural impact. Mm-hmm. And they're entirely different animals. And so I don't know. Are you one of those people who was a one or the other, or were you one of those people who was a both? You know, some people are either Star Wars or Star Trek.
Yeah, I was more both. I was more watched The Next Generation when it was on TV, in the mid '90s, and saw some of the movies, but was never super into. I was really more into comics than Star Wars or Star Trek, although I enjoyed both. But certainly the thing Awakens before I thought the two.
Hold on, you're cutting a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me?
No, I can, but I think either your connection dropped a little bit or mine dropped. Were you able to? Did I pixelate?
You seem fine.
Okay. Start again just from the last thing you were saying. You just finished saying that you were really more into comics, but you did to the extent to which you like both. You like both. And Next Generation was your primary entry into Star Trek. Pick up from there.
Right. Okay. So the thing that had me most concerned before The Force Awakens came out was that the two J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies were fine movies, but totally forgettable. And after seeing them in theaters, I never wanted to watch them again.
Right.
Whereas what's so great about the original Star Wars movies is that they're kind of infinitely rewatchable. So I do think maybe it was a poor fit. Star Trek is certainly more philosophical than Star Wars, and I think there's a lot more, kind of big ideas involved in Star Trek than there are in Star Wars. So maybe it was just a mistake for Abrams to ever take on Star Trek in a reboot, and Star Wars was really much more up his alley.
I got the sense. Now I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that somebody's asked him this, and I'm sure this information is out there. I get the impression that Star Wars means a lot more to Abrams than Star Trek does, and maybe he was one of those kids for whom Star Wars was the thing, not really Star Trek. To me, I'm a fan of both. I grew up with both. So I grew up as a kid seeing the original Star Wars in the theaters and watching the original Star Trek in syndication in the 70s. Okay, which is when it became successful. The original Star Trek was a flop.
It was only out for like 3 seasons.
They canceled after 3 seasons. It became huge in syndication, and that's what then led to them making the first movie in 1979. Right. So I was a fan of both, and I was a fan of both from the beginning. And so I'm pretty clear on what each did for me. And I think to the extent that I am not all that special, I'm somewhat representative in that sense of how they touched the American public. Star Wars was, like, I think the way you characterize best is it is mythology, right? It is not so much about character as it is about types that almost in a sense you can put yourself into, right? One of those types is one that you can identify with, and you can almost fantasize about yourself being in their place. Right. And the adventure is just simply the vehicle for you for that emotional connection, right? and it was done well enough, and the archetypes would bring it up. In a lot of ways, it has many qualities of a Western. Star Wars. In other ways, it has the qualities of the classical myths that you talked about, the connection with Joseph Campbell. Star Trek, in many ways, was ensemble based. It really mattered who that ensemble was, and when the ensemble was strong, the show was successful. As it was in the original series, as it was in Next Generation, where the ensemble was fantastic. When the ensemble was weak, the show suffered. And Voyager probably was its nadir in terms of the weakness of the ensemble, to the point to which they felt they had to bring in Jerry Ryan in a slinky catsuit just to get people interested, because the main characters were so dull and uninteresting. So Star Trek, I always think of in terms of the strength of those characters, and there the characters really matter. You're not inhabiting those characters; those characters are fleshed out, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one element in which they're very different, and in which the connection with them is very different. I think it's part of the reason why people connect in a personal way with Star Wars that maybe they don't as much with Star Trek. The connection with Star Trek is more intellectual and more aesthetic. Mm-hmm. The connection with Star Wars is very personal because every kid inhabited one of those characters himself. I also think that Star Wars is true science fiction.
Star Trek, you mean?
I'm sorry, Star Trek is true science fiction in the best golden age sci-fi tradition of Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, building enormous worlds with very intricate, detailed histories. If you take Star Trek from beginning to the end, the vastness of the storytelling and the intricacy of the history is like something like it's like out of like Asimov's Foundation or something. I mean, you're talking huge chunks of history with enormous detail poured in between. Not to mention the science fiction element, which I think America has had a love for going back to the Cold War. And in that sense, I think that Star Trek is the only really great example of sort of golden age type science fiction in the television medium. I will give a shout out. I think a show that's almost as good as Star Trek, it's just much smaller in its scope, is a show that ran called Babylon 5. Which is also a magnificent space opera that covers a 5-year span and really does also paint a very, very intricate and detailed history. So I just think that Star Trek and Star Wars, they scratch different elements of the American consciousness, but I think they both do so in such incredible ways, and it's amazing that they overlap roughly the same chunk of time, to the point to which a kid like me could grow up having both of these things. It's not an exaggeration to say that this show and this movie franchise shaped the imagination of several generations of kids, of American kids. Yeah. There's nothing else you can say about that I can think of.
Mm-hmm. As you were speaking, I was thinking about the difference in the fandoms, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but I think, the Trekkie fan was kind of like the nerdy fan, the like original, like taking it too far fan of a science fiction property.
Yeah.
And there was that famous SNL skit where was it Shatner?
Yes,
or was it
it's Shatner. Yes, it's Shatner.
Shatner, yelling at him like it was just a stupid TV show. Right. And then Star Wars, maybe because it started off as a movie and was, the kind of one of the first big like special effects blockbuster movies. Always like there's people who are super Star Wars nerds, but maybe and because it wasn't like hard sci-fi, it had kind of a wider appeal.
Yeah,
and someone could be a big Star Wars fan without kind of self-identifying.
Yeah. In
the way that like a Trekkie would self-identify as it being a core part of their identity.
No, I agree with that. I mean, if you want to make sort of minute social distinctions, make the distinction between a geek and a nerd. You do have Star Wars nerds. You don't really have Star Wars geeks. You have legions. You have legions.
So what do you see the difference between the nerd and the geek?
The geek is a detail enthusiast in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, the geek is the one who wants to, I'm not, and this is of course a crude in the sense that, yes, they're kids building model Millennium Falcons, right? But there just was an element, an interest, an intense interest in the technical details of all the Star Trek sort of universe that I don't think, that I just don't think was as much the case. I think it's a smaller subset of. There's a huge Star Wars fan base that's not like that at all, right? That for whom these are things that they grew up with. They're like they're like children's stories that we loved. Star Trek, the intense fan base is very much like that, right? They're very geeky. They're very into the tech. And the details of the costumes and all these sorts of things. I guess I would say a larger portion of the fan base of Star Trek is geeky than of the Star Wars fan base. I suspect the Star Wars fan base is larger overall than the Star Trek, but I suspect also that the size of the committed to the sort of maniacal committed fan base is larger for Star Trek than Star Wars for this reason.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and certainly the box office results support that thesis.
Yeah.
We're probably close to the end of our time. Is there anything else you want to discuss?
No, this is terrific. I should probably tell people that I knew you were doing this other thing on Star Wars and philosophy with this other guy, and I had this moment. I was crushed and devastated because I was planning. I said, "Gosh, I want to do another one with Aryeh. This would be perfect." And then I asked you, like, "Well, I'm doing it with this other guy," and I got all upset. But I really appreciate that you've managed to fit another one in, and I hope that you're not going to get Star Wars overload.
I certainly haven't. I've only seen the new one once. Going to go see it again in 3D.
Me too.
But probably the philosophy one will air subsequent to this one. I also have some local news, some personal news to share with the Blogging Heads fans, viewers, community, commenters. I'm actually leaving Blogging Heads at the end of the year, which is today, basically, to start a new job at the University of Rochester, and so I am no longer going to be the managing editor. I hope to continue to do occasional culturally determined episodes as time goes on, but we'll kind of have to see. So I want to first of all thank Bob Wright for employing me for the past 8 years. It's really been a great experience. I want to thank my coworkers, especially Brenda Talbot and Brian Dagenhart. I want to thank all of the show hosts, including you, who I've worked with at Blogging Heads over the years, and of course want to thank the viewers and commenters who make up the Blogging Heads community. I will not be writing the headlines anymore, but hopefully I'll still be involved in Blogging Heads in some way.
Well, Aryeh, it has been a pleasure to work with you. I should tell the audience that Aryeh really does an amazing job. For those of us who in a sense create the content, he's just amazing to work with. Very generous, nice, helpful, responds quickly. I mean, you're a mensch, and we're gonna really miss you.
Well, thank you.
And I think a lot of the show's successes have to do with your work, and I do hope you keep your program, because I think that's a way to keep with us. But we'll see if your job really permits it, I guess, right?
Yeah, we'll have to see. I hope to be able to keep on doing it. But we'll see what happens. So stay tuned. Next time. Hopefully there will be a next time. I guess this is kind of a cliffhanger, just like the end of Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
That's right.
I'm holding up the lightsaber, and we'll see what happens. Thanks to the viewers. Thank you, Dan, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, Aryeh.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.